This is Brent Rains engaging with Dr. Gregory Little in a second segment of From Psychology to Indian Mounds. Well, Greg, in our first interview, you described how you went from a mainstream psychology to an obsession with Indian mounds. Can you describe for us how you then became involved with the search for Atlantis?
First of all, thanks again. I like these little brief 15-minute ones. They're great, and it allows me to, talk about a specific topic and kind of maybe set up the next one. But anyway, okay, so last time I talked about how I got involved in mounds and really got obsessed with visiting mounds, getting pictures of them, getting as much information about them as I could. And of course, I also mentioned Edgar Cayce because Edgar Cayce obviously relates to Atlantis and the search for Atlantis. So what happened was this. Back in the 1990s, the very late 1990s, my wife and I got a little more involved with Edgar Cayce's organization, which is called the ARE, the Association for Research and Enlightenment. And at the time, we were asked by a fellow by the name of John Van Auken and then Charles Thomas Cayce, who was then the executive director of the ARE, and he was a grandson of the psychic Edgar Cayce, and of course he's now deceased. But we were asked if we would be interested in generating a monthly newsletter for ARE members called Ancient Mysteries, and so we did it. We did it for a couple years, and in the beginning, Lora and I were involved in the Ancient Mysteries Conference, which is a yearly event at the ARE. The one this year's is actually this coming weekend. It's already sold out, so I'm not selling anything here. But we were involved in that for about 8 or 9 years in a row, spoke every year. And I was asked to come up with some potential speakers. And what happened was this. In finding another speaker, we had been writing these articles in Ancient Mysteries newsletter. And of course, because the ARE has an interest in Atlantis, because Edgar Cayce said Atlantis really was an island empire extending from Gibraltar all the way to the American continents, and it was centered mainly, an island empire centered mainly in the Caribbean, which would be the Bahamas and all the islands in that region of the ocean. Atlantis was in, we wrote some articles about Atlantis in Ancient Mysteries, but that's all it was. I knew what the ARE's research had been for many, many years, and all the Atlantis research had sort of come to a standstill, but at the same time, it was a stalemate with skeptics. And the skeptics said that what is known as the Bimini Road or Bimini Wall, which is an underwater formation near the island of Bimini, which is a very tiny island of the Bahamas, about 55 miles due east from Miami and Fort Lauderdale. There was this formation discovered in 1968. The ARE was involved in researching it. Skeptics said that it was natural beach rock. The ARE's researchers said they were also, they were PhDs. Some of them said, no, it's man-made. But I believed what the skeptics said at the time. So we're talking about around 1999 to 2000. So in the course of researching who possible speakers could be at this Ancient Mysteries Conference, I came upon this guy from England named Andrew Collins. And I found Andrew Collins had written a number of very interesting books. One was called Gateway to Atlantis. And in Gateway to Atlantis, he had studied Cayce, and he believed that the main island of Atlantis was Cuba. And that's another story. Maybe we can save that for another time. But I decided that we really need to contact this Andrew Collins guy and get him to come to America and speak at the Ancient Mysteries Conference. So we did. So he came over in 2002. That's when we got him to come. When Andrew gave his talk, and these talks are in front of about 250 to 300 people or so. When he gave his talk, he showed two pictures. Both of those pictures had been taken in 1968. One was in southern Andros Island, which Andros is the largest Bahamas island. It's 104 miles long, to give you an idea how big it is. It's kind of oblong shaped. It's 30 miles wide at its very widest point, but it's broken up by what are called bights, tidal bights, which are tidal flows that run across, cutting it into dozens of islands when the tide is high. Anyway, Andrew showed these two pictures that Charles Berlitz had put in a book on Atlantis and the Bermuda Triangle. And in those pictures, both of which I'd seen before, but I just really never thought about them. One of them, he showed an E-shaped formation. When I say E, I'm talking about the small cursive E. It looks just like the letter E. So they had seen it from the air in 1968, photographed it. And when I say they, it was a fellow by the name of Dmitry Rybakov, a PhD in underwater archaeology. He got his PhD from the Sorbonne in France, and he had done a lot of research in the Bahamas, but he could never find it. And he thought this has to be a man-made structure. Well, there was another structure found roughly the same time in extreme southern Andros. And we know exactly where it is because we've been to it. But up to that time, to 2002, nobody had been to it. What that structure was what looked from the air in the photograph they took like a triple ring of standing stones. It was gigantic, a lot bigger than Stonehenge, probably about the size of Avebury. Some people said it was 1,000 feet to 2,000 feet in diameter. And it did, in the picture that was taken, the black and white photograph, it did look like a triple ring of stones. So Andrew showed that picture along with Rybakov's E. And it was very interesting. And I remember my wife and I were sitting in the audience, and I remember turning to her and saying, we could go find that. We could see what that really is. Now, the reason that I was so interested in it is because I thought there had to be some mounds in the Bahamas, because there were mound building cultures in Cuba and really in all the islands in the Caribbean. There's mound building cultures everywhere in the world. So that kind of was part of my interest in mounds, but also the standing stones. And frankly, the discovery of a gigantic ring of standing stones, a triple ring of stones, one ring inside of the other, that would be an incredible discovery. No one had ever supposedly seen it before. Lots of people had tried to find it. And so I started doing research on it before we decided to go find it, and found some people that claimed they'd seen it, talked to them, saw their evidence. Nope, they simply used the original picture. No one had ever refound it. Now, it was in water, which meant it was probably underwater during the last ice age, but you could see the stones sticking out of the water. So that's really how we got started in this. So in January of 2003, the conference was in October of 2002. We immediately talked to the ARES, Atlantis researchers. We talked to the people that said they'd seen it before, and all they'd ever seen are the pictures, the one picture that had been taken. And I talked to an archaeologist who had spent an enormous amount of money trying to find it from the air, flying all over Andros. And I asked him where he went and what he did, and he told me. And I said, well, I still think we can find it. So I did the following. That's when I got my scuba diving training and got my scuba certificate and so on, because I figured, well, we may need to be able to scuba this. I arranged with it's not really a resort, but it's sort of a cabin area on Andros Island. Andros is not a place where many tourists go, and only eastern Andros and a few tiny places is inhabited. The whole island has 5,000 inhabitants. They're on a little narrow band on the far eastern side, but these formations were on the western side. So I talked to them. We scheduled to go there. I talked to a charter, an airline, not an airline, it was a private charter that was a twin engine plane that went very slow. But before we did this, I decided, let's try and find the person that took the photograph. Well, the pilot that took the photograph, and he told us the story, he was in a DC-3 with another guy flying a load of chickens from Puerto Rico to the United States. He saw this thing. He opened up the window, reached out, and with a small brownie camera, snapped the picture.
Mm.
And so we found him, and I said, well, do you know where it is? And he said, sure. And I said, has anybody asked you where it is? And his exact words were, strangely and curiously, no one has ever asked. Nobody'd ever asked him. I said, well, where is it? He went back. He came out with a pilot's map, an aerial map of Andros, and he pointed to the spot, and he said, it's right about here. And he said, but there were really two of these circles there, not this one. There was actually a bigger circle further north. So that's how it started. We then got on this charter plane. The pilot of the plane actually let me fly co-pilot because at the time I had my pilot's license was active. And we told him what it was. We told him where it was. It turned out it's in Cuban airspace. Southern Andros, extreme southern Andros, is in Cuban airspace. So they're ADZ zones. It's in the Havana ADZ zone. So we had to fly below Cuban radar, which we did. We flew at about 500 feet. We went up and down the coast of Andros. We found lots of circles, and eventually we found Ribikov's E. The advantage we have, again, as opposed to the older researchers, was we could use GPS from the air. Because see, you can see things from the air, but then you get on a boat and you can't see. You can't tell where you are. You can't tell where that formation was. So we got the GPS of the E, flew further south. We found a gigantic white circle with nothing around it, which I figured was the second circle that the pilot, whose name was Trig Adams, told us about. We flew further south, and there it was. And we flew around and around this white circle. It's a white circle, and it looks like it has these giant stones sticking out of the water. Now, it's not a full ring of stones. It's like the bottom half has a ring, and then you can see another ring, and then there's little dots of them. So you perceive 3 rings of stone. It was a very difficult task that would take me 15 minutes to explain how we got there, because it's very remote, it's very dangerous. The people on Andros told us, you are crazy to go over there. If something happens to that little boat you're taking over there, you're going to be trapped because there's nobody there. Cell phones don't work. There's no radio to pick up. There's no planes that go over. There's no boats that go by. We would have to walk across the island and try to go through those bites. By the way, every time the high tide comes in, those bites, the tidal bites, it's almost like a river that forms every time that it's high tide. They're filled with sharks moving back and forth. It's really quite strange. But anyway, we arranged a sponge diver in a little boat about the size of a bass boat here in the U.S. He had a 25 horsepower engine. We went through water that was maybe a foot deep, about halfway. It's about a 45-mile boat ride to get to it. And we got to this circle, and the circle turned out to be a sponge. All of those giant black rocks that look like rocks, even when you walk up to them, they look like rocks, but they're actually sponge. The sponge diver was elated. He had never been down there. He said he didn't know anybody else that had been down there. And there was sponge all over the place outside of the circle. So there was a pure white circle in the center. It was exactly 250 feet in diameter. We measured it. The other circle was 1,000 feet in diameter, the big white one. But it was sponge. And there was a coral head, a small coral head in the center. And the coral head is the key to forming the circle. It's really involved. But anyway, it has to do with the coral head, and then there's crustaceans and so on that live in the coral head. And the crustaceans attract small fish. The small fish attract bigger fish. The bigger fish attract even bigger fish. And so the coral head has constantly got this swirling motion of the sponge around. And as the Bahamian told us, these circles are all over. And he said the lobster and the crustaceans and all the shrimp that are living in the coral head are always cleaning their space. That is, they keep pushing sand out as it moves in. And then the sand starts forming a circle around it. Nothing grows there. And then the fish keep pushing the sand out further and further. And long involved story. Well, we were not able to get to that E-shaped formation. It would have been a 100-mile trip for us. We could find nobody on the western side of Andros. It was on the north end that had a boat that could take us there. Nobody. We went back to the States immediately, wrote this up, put it in Ancient Mysteries, and then through just lots of search on the internet, calling loads of people in the Bahamas, found a Bahamian who had a speedboat down there. He was, of course, he lived on the eastern side of the island, and he agreed to take us over. So we got in the boat on the eastern side of the island after we flew back to Andros less than a month later. We went all the way around the north end of the island. We found this E-shaped formation, and I'm the only person that went in the water to it, and it was a coral head. And that coral head had turtle grass growing on it. It did look like the letter E, but it was nothing. And that was going to be it. We had no intention of ever going back. That wasn't something I wanted to do. So we arranged a plane to come over and pick us up the next morning about 10 o'clock in the morning. We went back to the hotel we were staying at in extreme northeastern Andros. I call it a hotel. It is a hotel, but it's pretty rustic. And there was a violent thunderstorm that came up. It was actually very, very odd. And there was a knock on the door. And who the heck is that? And so we eventually went over. I didn't know if I wanted to answer it or not, but we eventually answered it, and it was an American who lived in Andros. He asked us who we were, and he said he had heard about us, and he said, "You're treasure hunters, aren't you? Because that's the only people that go down there and do what we're doing." And we said, "No." I said, we have no interest in treasure at all. And he said, "That's what the treasure hunters say." So I pulled out all this stuff. He told us he'd been a dive operator there. So I said, "Okay, well, here's all the stuff." I showed him the pictures. I showed him all of the paperwork we had and everything we were doing. And he said, "You're for real." He said, "You're the only ones that have ever come down here, and you're not into treasure." And he said, "Well, let me tell you something." He said, "There's a formation that I found." And I don't remember how many years ago that he said it was. And he said, "It's right here. And it looks like the Bimini Road, only it's larger." And we said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said a hurricane came through a couple years ago, and it uncovered this massive structure. And he said, "I'd never seen it before. I'd been back and forth on my boat many times because we'd go over it when we'd go scuba diving out in deeper water." And I said, "Where is it?" I said, "I'd like to see it." And he said, "Well, I can't take you there because I don't have my dive boat anymore." And he wasn't allowed to dive because he'd had sinus issues. But he said, "If you simply go up," he told us how to go. Just walk about a quarter mile. And he said, "and just go straight out. Just go straight out." He said, if it's uncovered, you cannot miss it." So the next morning at 7 o'clock, my wife and I carried all of our gear up to this spot. She stayed on land and she filmed it. There's actually a YouTube video I put on my Facebook page. It's probably pretty much the first thing there right now where this occurred. And it actually shows as soon as I got out of the water what I talked about. I snorkeled out, and I went out 200-300 yards into the ocean. Didn't see anything. And I thought, well, maybe it's a slightly different area. And we walked to this point off on this karst. Karst is a type of limestone that forms on the beach. It's got holes in it, but it gets very, very sharp, and it's dangerous. So not many people walk on it. But we went over this karst and went to a point, and I did it again. I snorkeled out, and then beneath me, after about another 200 yards, so it was about 400 yards offshore, there are these massive blocks of stone. And when I say blocks, these huge rectangular blocks. And when I say huge, I mean the largest ones were 20 feet by 15 feet because we've measured them. 20 feet by 15 feet. Very rectangular, straight sides. The front side that was exposed was really eroded badly. The parts that was covered by sand, when you cleaned it off, you'd see, well, there's a seam there, and there's another block attached to it. It went on for about 1,200 feet. At the time, I didn't know how far it was, but I could see there were 3 lines of these stones. I took some pictures. At that time, we had these little cheap underwater cameras. That's all I could carry out there at the time. And I took a few pictures of it. They had film in them, so we had to wait till we got home to develop the film. And what we saw was kind of astonishing. So I sent it around. I sent it to some geologists at universities, and I sent it to some of the ARE researchers that had PhDs. And they said, one of them said, that's the Bimini Road. And I said, no, that's not the Bimini Road. It turns out it is a little bigger. It's not as long as the Bimini Road, but it's much larger. And that is how the search for Atlantis started. We then started going back to this spot several times, and then we realized, okay, we need to go take a look at the Bimini Road. And I didn't want to. I had avoided, we had never been to Bimini. We did all this work on Andros, never been to Bimini. And I said, we've got to compare this to the Bimini Road and see why they say the Bimini Road is a natural formation. And that led me into contacting the skeptics. I found out the skeptics cannot be trusted. There are a lot of literal lies and deceptions in what they said. And we did 25 week-long trips in the Bahamas over a course of 10 years. We also did trips into the Yucatan. We actually did a real expedition into the Yucatan. My wife and I were the 2 people in the expedition, and we hired a group to take us in. That's another whole story we could get into. But that's how it started. I had no intention of doing it. We subsequently came out with this book called the ARE Search for Atlantis. We called it the Search for Atlantis Project. It was done under the auspices of the ARE, and we had an archaeological permit that we were working under that and mainstream archaeologists allowed us to use. The many other times we went under film permits with documentary makers. We made documentaries with the National Geographic, the Science Channel, Sci-Fi, the National Geographic, Discovery, a whole bunch of others. We did 14 documentaries altogether. But we documented all of our little trips. Actually, I don't know if you can see this very well. That's a picture of one of the blocks, and that's me scuba diving over it. And my wife did all the filming of it. So we did that. Then the ARE asked us to do a book on Edgar Cayce's Atlantis, and we did. It's literally called Edgar Cayce's Atlantis. ARE Press published it, and that documents it. But I reached the point to where I was so involved doing other things. I was still working on the Mounds Encyclopedia on the time. I finished that in the midst of doing all this, and then I wanted to update the Mounds Encyclopedia, which I finished in 2016. 2012 was the end of 2012 is when we took our very last trip on it. So that's kind of how it got started. It was never meant to be. It was not really a conscious decision. We kind of stumbled into it. I only initially wanted to find if there really was a triple ring of stone circles in the Bahamas. I kind of wish there had been, but it wasn't meant to be. I was hoping that that E-shaped formation actually was a building, which is what they thought. I have no idea why someone would think the letter E would look like a building, would be a building. But in our many trips to the Bahamas, one of the things we did was fly up and down the whole coastal area between the Bahamas and Florida, and all everything that is 300 feet and shallower. We went up and down, and we got we found roughly 150 sites. We found almost every letter in the alphabet. I'm not kidding.
Wow.
I mean, you see these formations, the letter A, the letter B, the letter Z appears all the time. There's D's. We've seen the letter Q. Every letter in the alphabet you can see somewhere down there in the turtle grass. So there's a little bit of human psychology involved in seeing those letters. But we visited a lot of those. We were hoping to find underwater building structures and stone structures. We did find a few building structures. I know you're aware of that. We didn't find anything that was truly, that we could say definitively is Atlantis. But the sum total of what we found is this. We found 31 crashed planes, of course, including several that were being Bermuda Triangle planes. But we found several stone formations that are definitely building formations, but they probably are not related to Atlantis. They can't be 10 or 12,000 years old is what I'm saying, because Atlantis supposedly disappeared roughly 10,000 BC. Casey said 10,000 BC. Plato said 9,600 BC, but there's no way these dated to 10,000 BC. There's a lot more involved in it, but that's how we got into it.
Wow, what a journey. What a journey. And so many, you really outdid yourselves. What amazing.
Well, it's hard to fit that into 15 minutes, and I don't think I did it, did I?
We're on 26 now.
Okay, well, sorry.
That's all right. We got one more question. And, you know, we're going to have to revisit this and cover all these other parts that are dangling out there. But, you know, the big question that's on a lot of people's minds is, do you think Atlantis really existed?
Well, okay, so I know this, and I'll say it very quickly so we can end this. It's very clear there was an ancient maritime culture. It probably was very, very old, maybe even predates 10 and 12,000 BC, goes way back. There's evidence of it all over the world. There was a maritime culture. It has no name. Plato called it Atlantis. That's it. I don't know what else to say. There is no other name for it. It's pre-Phoenician, it's pre-Roman, it's pre-anything. So Plato called that prehistoric civilization Atlantis. So there was something. You can call it whatever you want. Atlantis it's the A word in archaeology. No mainstream archaeologist that I know of will come out and say, yeah, Atlantis existed, but there's a lot we don't know, and there's, you know, some civilization stuff here and there that needs to be discovered, but they won't say it's Atlantis. So did something exist? Absolutely. And most of it's underwater. It's under sand. It's under slime and muck, which in that video I did, you can see me standing on this stuff, sinking into this, it looks like white paste. And I was sunk in about 2.5 feet into it. And we were in a foot of water and I'm standing in it, but I'm up to here in that stuff. So wow. Yeah, something existed. We can take this up again next time, and we'll see where we can twist this off next time. And keeping them brief and short keeps listeners interested if they want to.
Well, Greg, thank you very much. This has been very fascinating and another thought-provoking segment. And I can't wait to see what we'll delve into the next time and the next and the next. And
well, the next. We'll see if we can stay alive that long. Time is catching up, man.
We got to do our best.
Thanks a lot. Viewers, take care.
All right. Thanks. Thanks, Greg.